Welcome back to the Aussie Game podcast, where we talk all things Australian football. Huge weekend coming up with plenty of exciting action. We're just going to take a quick look back at the week that was in Australian football since the last time we recorded, because there's been plenty going on. We're going to start with Sunday night. Hearts taking on Celtic, top of the table clash. Cam Devlin, heart of the midfield there. Hearts actually prevailed 3-1 against Celtic. At the time, they opened up an 8-point lead over Celtic, which is absolutely massive. Following that result, Brendan Rodgers, the Celtic manager, did resign. Huge fallout from all that happening as well. But let's stick with Hearts, because Cam Devlin, outstanding season so far for him, right at the centre of everything that Hearts are doing. So congratulations to Cam Devlin, and should definitely be in that Socceroos squad for the November window coming up. Also on Sunday night, Kevin Muscat's Shanghai Port lost 3-1, which you would think would be a huge dent in their title aspirations. Fortunately for them, their two main rivals for that Chinese Super League title also dropped points as well. So Kevin Muscat's team remains top, 2 games to go in that competition. We'll touch on that a little bit later, because there's some huge games coming up tonight as we record on a Friday. Let's lean over to Monday morning. Really bad injury news, potentially for Geordie Boss, who was injured in Feyenoord's 3-2 loss to PSV. Still no reports as to the severity of the injury, but some saying that it didn't look very good. So fingers crossed it's not a long-term injury for Geordie Boss, and that he's back for Feyenoord sooner rather than later, because we know how important he is to the Socceroos. Also on Monday morning, Matty Ryan was in action for Levante. They had a 1-1 draw with Mallorca, with Matty Ryan making 4 saves. So we'll see what happens between him and Paul Izzo, potentially Joe Gauci, in the upcoming window, who gets the starting spot in Tony Popovic's team. And then Paul Izzo himself, he had a clean sheet and 3 saves in Rander's 0-0 draw in the league as well. So plenty of competition for spots for the goalkeeper's spot in the Socceroos. And surprising 45 minutes for Daniel Arzani at Ferencváros. It's the most minutes he's played in a competitive match since arriving at Ferencváros. So potentially this might be an upside for him to start getting some minutes. Again, question marks over whether he is going to be included in that Socceroos squad for that November window. We'll wait and see on that one. Let's go to Tuesday. The big news coming out of Tuesday was that David Zrilic, the Perth Glory coach, or former Perth Glory coach now, sacked. Only 2 games into the season. They had a 2-2 draw with Wellington to start before a thumping 4-0 loss to Melbourne City. So very interesting timing with the sacking. Wonder what they saw in 2 games that they didn't see either at the back end of last season or in the off season. But certainly things not going well for Perth Glory so far. Plenty of names linked to the job. Both the Aloisi brothers have been linked in the past couple of days. But it's an important time for Perth Glory. They have really struggled over the past couple of seasons, and will a new manager coming in being able to get this team going in the right direction? They do have some quality in their squad, particularly in the front third. But can a new manager get the most out of that squad? Probably expect to see an announcement for that manager. Probably not this weekend. They have a huge game against Melbourne Victory tonight, but maybe next week we'll see some information around whether that's an interim manager or a permanent manager coming in. Wednesday morning, the Matildas went down 3-0 to England. We will go through this in more detail in the podcast on Sunday, but just to give a top line review, it's probably a bit hard to analyse given that Alana Kennedy was sent off so early in the game. Didn't really get a chance to see what combinations were working. There were a few changes from the Wales game, but really it was a backs to the wall performance with a player down for the majority of the game. But as I said, we'll go through that in a bit more detail on the podcast on Sunday. Heading over to the Netherlands, 63 minutes for Cam Pupion as ADO Den Haag are knocked out of the Cup in the Netherlands. But in some better news, Josh Nisbet got 90 minutes in Rotor JC's big 5-1 win in the Cup. Both of those guys obviously going very well in the second division in the Netherlands, trying to push for promotion. Over in Switzerland, the first league start for Liam Chipperfield in Sion's 3-2 win, where he created the most chances in his 71 minutes on the pitch. So he's an exciting prospect, Liam Chipperfield, probably not getting as much game time as he would like at Sion, but good to see him get a start in this one. Over in Germany, Connor Metcalf got 81 minutes in their cup win, and Jackson Irvine was an unused sub. That one went all the way to penalties, but St. Pauli were able to get past Hoffenheim in that game. Over to the States was an all-Aussie clash between Aidan O'Neill and Archie Goodwin, with New York City FC beating Charlotte 1-0. Very nice goal, actually, in this one to seal the win for New York City FC. Aidan O'Neill played a full game, as he normally does for New York City FC, and Archie Goodwin got 12 minutes off the bench. So hopefully we see him continuing to get minutes, but pleasing that he's been given the responsibility to get minutes off the bench in such an important game. So they'll continue to play throughout the playoff series, these two teams, until we see who progresses to the next round. Let's go to Thursday. Alessandro Circati scored his first goal for Parma as they lost 2-1 to Roma. But good to see Circati playing well, continuing to perform, so crucial to the Socceroos, even at such a young age. Aiden Hrustic, he had a goal and a player of the match performance for Heracles in their 4-1 win over NAC Breda. On the other side of the pitch, Max Ballard plays 90 minutes for NAC Breda. Unfortunately for Heracles, it wasn't a league performance because they are really struggling in the league at the bottom of the table. But maybe they'll go on a nice cup run and get some confidence throughout the squad. There were a few teams back in action for Scotland, midweek. Hibs lost 1-0 to Rangers as they continue to climb up the table after their really slow start. Jack Iredale got a full game. Martin Boyle came off the bench in that one. Another all-Aussie affair between Motherwell and Dundee United. Johnny Katrumbis started for Motherwell, and Apostolos Stamatoulopoulos got an assist off the bench. Oscar Priestman was unused. Sapsford also got a start for Dundee United as well. Ryan Strain still remains out through injury for Dundee United. And after that big win against Celtic on Sunday night, Hearts unfortunately dropped points to St Mirren in a 2-2 draw. Cam Devlin played the 90 minutes, and for St Mirren, Keanu Bacchus played 75 minutes as well. So still holding a pretty handy lead in Scotland. I think it's now 6 points, but certainly Celtic and Rangers will be wanting to hunt Hearts down after their impressive start to the season. And then tough one for Cam Burgess. He played 90 minutes as Swansea lost 3-1 to Manchester City, which ends their League Cup run. All right, let's go to Friday morning. Not too much action, few teams, but none of our Aussies in action besides Marcus Eunice, who got 49 minutes off the bench for Brøndby, but they unfortunately got knocked out of the Cup. But let's turn our attention now to what's happening this weekend. As I mentioned, in China, there's plenty happening because Shanghai Port are closing in on their title, but there's plenty of teams trying to chase them down. So first up in action tonight, Shanghai Port play at 9 p.m, followed by Chengdu Rongcheng playing at 10:35, and then Shanghai Shenhua at 11 p.m. So if Shanghai Port get the win tonight and the other two teams drop some points, it could all be wrapped up for Kevin Muscat's side this evening. But if not, it's going to go down to the final weekend. But first things first for Muskie and his team, they need to get past Zhejiang Professional, who are currently sitting 7th in the table. So certainly won't be an easy game for them. And as mentioned just before, all teams dropped some points last weekend, so maybe getting a bit nervy towards the end of the season. But let's hope that Muskie can get the job done and get Shanghai Port across the line. That would be absolutely fantastic. And then we'll see after that if any of these links to clubs in Europe come about. Let's talk about the A-League men. Some really tasty fixtures coming up this weekend. Brisbane Roar, fresh off their loss over in Wellington last weekend, going to take on Melbourne City. Potentially a contrast in styles, with Melbourne City being pretty fluid and Brisbane being pretty solid or resolute, which is how Michael Valkanis has been setting them up. Let's hope there's a great crowd out there at Brisbane Roar. We saw the signs of that in their first game against Macarthur, so hopefully those crowds continue to build and build for them. Over in the West, Perth Glory hosting Melbourne Victory. So this was going to be a huge clash for both coaches if David Zrilic remained in his position. But it's still a big game because Melbourne Victory is certainly not going to want to drop points to Perth Glory. They've had a pretty tough start to the season, of course, 0-0 draw with Auckland to start, and then got thumped by the Jets 5-2 last weekend. So Arthur Dillis' side certainly going to want to get the win over in Perth Glory, but will Perth get a bit of a reaction from the players now that David Zulich has left? Let's head into Saturday. Auckland FC hosting Adelaide United. Now, these teams played out some absolute thrillers last season, so we're probably expecting, well, let's hope we can expect the same. Adelaide, pretty fluid. They're okay against Macarthur, but probably found it hard to break them down. So Auckland's going to be an even tougher test, you would think. So let's see what happens in that one. Big clash at the 5 o'clock game. Newcastle Jets hosting Sydney FC. Jets obviously flying in some great form, and then Sydney FC got back to winning ways last week against Central Coast Mariners. So big clash in that one. Let's hope again another big crowd turns out at Newcastle. Macarthur FC are hosting Western Sydney. Western Sydney still looking for their first win of the season. So Macarthur fresh off their Monday night game where they got their first win of the season against Adelaide. We'll see what happens in that game. And then Central Coast hosting the unbeaten Wellington Phoenix on the Sunday game. So yeah, interesting to see what happens there. Central Coast obviously got up for the F3 derby in the first round of the season, but fell a bit short against Sydney FC, whereas Wellington slow started in their first game against Perth, but managed to scrape a draw, and then another come from behind victory last weekend against Brisbane Roar. So wouldn't be relaxing too much, Central Coast Mariners fans, if you hold a lead into that game, because Phoenix are making a bit of a habit of coming from behind. So plenty of action in the A-League men's competition coming up. And it's also very exciting that we're about to start the A-League women's season as well. So let's go through the fixtures. The Wanderers hosting Perth Glory. Seen ticket sales for that one have been really good so far. So that's fantastic. And hopefully we see a great crowd out there for that game. That's on Friday night. Saturday, we head into Sydney FC taking on Melbourne City. Now, this should be an absolute cracking game. Two of probably the more fancied teams to go deep in the competition this season. So it'll be interesting to see what they show in the first round. Brisbane Roar are then the host Melbourne Victory. Victory have recruited and done some good work as well. But Brisbane have two. They've brought back some Matildas, Sean Fryer in particular. So those should be pretty tough to beat up there. But Melbourne Victory looking very good as well. Central Coast Mariners, of course, the A-League champions from last season. They're hosting Adelaide United, who were the surprise packets from last season. And then an interesting clash to round out the fixtures with Canberra United taking on Newcastle Jets. So Canberra only got the go-ahead to go forward for this season quite late, so continue to build their season, whereas Newcastle Jets have done some good recruitment as well. So very interesting to see how this weekend of the dub plays out, and we look forward to some great action as we've seen in the men's competition last couple of weeks. Of course, the Australian Championship also continues heading into round four. I'm going to pick out some of the key fixtures throughout the weekend, starting on Friday night with Marconi hosting Heidelberg. So Heidelberg with a perfect record. Marconi on the back of a good win against the Wollongong Wolves last weekend. Heidelberg can book their spot in the quarterfinals with a win, but not going to be easy. Coming up against Marconi, who they only just got past the first time the teams played in the Australian Championship. We've got Canberra FC taking on Avondale in the early game on Saturday, and then Sydney Olympic taking on the other team with a perfect record in the Australian Championship so far in South Melbourne. West Apia will look to bounce back after their shock loss to Bayswater last weekend when they host Metro Stars. Must-win game for the Wollongong Wolves when they take on South Hobart, that game in Wollongong. So, yeah, the Wolves need to win that to stay in touch with the two teams leading in that group being Marconi and Heidelberg. Also at 1 o'clock, Moreton City Excelsior take on Broadmeadow Magic. And then the high-flying Bayswater, they host Sydney United, who are really struggling in this Australian Championship in the 4:30 game. And then to finish it off, we have Northwest Sydney Spirit taking on Preston Lions. So huge games in the Australian Championship as we start to get down to the business end of the group stage. So as you can tell, plenty of action to look forward to this weekend, plenty of exciting matchups, and we haven't even covered our players playing overseas. So that's a quick wrap of the week and a bit of a preview of the fixtures in Australia. We'll be back on Sunday to record as normal to wrap through everything. So we hope you can join us then. In the meantime, enjoy your football.